Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Stay in Your Lane. I'm your host, John Maley, brought to you today by Triple T Transport, as always. Today is a subject that I think all of us are passionate about. That's why we have this group here. I want to introduce everyone. Thomas Kern, Benish Law, who's probably one of the most genuine, down-to-earth, bright attorneys I've worked with over the years. Thomas Kern, say hi to everyone.
Hello.
There he is, Mr. Personality. Then we have Slate Camp, Lighthouse Foods. Slate is the Director of Logistics and Transportation, Lighthouse. Slate, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Pat Musser, HP Hood, Director of Logistics Operations, Warehouse Food and Beverage. Welcome back, Pat. It's been a while.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's nice. We appreciate you and we appreciate Slate. We haven't seen either of you in quite some time, so welcome back. And our newest guest, not last, not least, Jim Jefferson, Supervisor Compliance and Regulatory from OOIDA. Definitely a value to the industry, so we appreciate what you do at OOIDA. Jim, if you'd like to say hi to the viewers, you're welcome to. Now's a great time.
Yeah, hi, I'm glad to be here. Hope we can have a good conversation about it.
Very good. We're glad to have you. So, talking about today's subject, what happens when freight bills go unpaid? I'm going to allow Pat Musser from HP Hood to go ahead and start this one off. Pat, have you been through these situations?
Yes, I've been through this several times, and every time it pops up, it's a nightmare. I think from a company standpoint, we're trying to protect ourselves and trying to do all of our due diligence ahead of time with our contracts, with our carriers and providers. But it seems like there's still incidences when things happen and go awry, and then you have them coming back at you again. And it is our intent, like I said, to, make ourselves whole. And if the opportunity presents itself that the carriers who halt the lanes have not been paid, we can compensate them. We do have issues when we get into the point where we're trying to be pushed to pay twice.
Very good. All right. So, Slate, where are you at? You've dealt with this some, I would assume, in all the years there at Lighthouse?
I have a few times. And the subject matter of this meeting made me curious about what everybody else is doing, because while I had one event in 2023, I've had two in 2024. And one was a pretty recent no pay situation, and one was from 2022 where the carrier is trying to collect. So I'm obviously sympathetic to the need for these carriers to be paid, but when you have something that old, you also have to be diligent about why the commitment from, in my case, a customer pickup was never completed. So this can take a lot of time. And again, I just wanted to try and learn a little bit about from what others are doing, and get Thomas's point of view on it and Jim's as well from the OOIDA standpoint.
Jim, ball's in your court. What are you dealing with?
Well, we're seeing it from the carrier side of things. So the carrier takes a load, they make the delivery, and then they don't get paid by the broker. And there's several reasons that can come up. Either brokers just refusing to pay, there could be a claim filed against the load, or most recently, there's a lot of fraudulent loads out there where the broker that posted isn't really the broker that owns it. And then by the time the load gets delivered, the carrier tries to get paid. They can't get paid because the guy that they got the contract from didn't really have rights to the load to begin with, and they've taken their money and disappeared. So now the carrier is forced to try and figure out, how do they get paid? Who do they get paid from? And what process do they have to go through? In a lot of cases, it's a long, drawn-out process. If the shipper has already paid the broker, the shipper doesn't want to have to pay for the product twice. But the carrier, the guy on the end that made the delivery, they're the ones that are out the money for the fuel, the time, the expense. They're the ones that made sure that load was delivered. And those folks need to be taken care of. So it's a matter of finding a way that works for both the carrier and the shipper, so that everybody gets what they need.
Very good. Now, how often are you seeing these scenarios, Jim?
Quite often, several times a week, we're getting calls. A lot of it is fraudulent stuff. But I just got a call that I'm dealing with right now on a load that was originally brokered to one broker, ended up with a completely different broker. The carrier didn't get paid, and now I'm trying to work back through the original broker and the shipper to see what we can do to get our carrier paid.
Wow, that's a mess when you have double brokering involved. I don't know that those situations ever come out great.
Right.
I mean, I think the primary brokers usually where a lot of liability is, correct?
Right. Yeah, the primary broker, especially depending on the contract that they've got negotiated with their shipper, a lot of times it falls on the primary broker. And in some cases, that primary broker will do the right thing and they'll go ahead and pay the carrier, even though they've spent the money the first time. They'll go ahead and pay it out a second time.
Yeah.
Then one of the other issues that we're seeing a lot of is new brokers getting into the industry, and basically they're getting in to make as much money as they can as quickly as possible and get out. So they don't pay anybody. You start filing claims against the bond. By the time the bond gets shut down and the broker gets put out of business, you may have $400,000 or $500,000 filed against the bond. The bond's only going to pay $75,000. So a lot of folks are going to be out a lot of money because they're going to get pennies on the dollar at that point, and there's nobody to really go after because the broker got paid but didn't pay anybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, Thomas, these sound familiar?
Every situation you've named has occurred. And it's interesting because you handle each one we've discussed is not exactly the same, right? So
Correct.
There's tools you use for each situation that might be a little different from the other. You might have a legitimate broker who has brokered the load to a carrier, everything done perfectly, everything done right. Then the carrier illegally brokers to another carrier, right? That could be a situation. You could have the broker in the middle who goes under, which we've described, and is not paying anybody, right? Just using as much as they can and getting out, which is why, I mean, as a side note, why a reputable broker is so important. I mean, it is so important in this. You just have less issues. And you may have someone wanting a shipper to pay twice. You may have someone asking a broker to pay twice. You may have a claim on the load. It's a variable of situations. Each can be a little different. And depending on the situation, you adjust. For instance, if and generally there's the sort of two schools of thought in the industry right now, at least, with I'd say the majority saying the risk is on the shipper. United States Supreme Court cases that say, the carriers are so important, otherwise nothing's going to get anywhere. So, shipper, unless X, Y, and Z, you may have to pay twice. Then you have another school of thought that has developed, which is sort of the equitable estoppel, where the risk isn't on the shipper. They've already paid for it once. They shouldn't have to do it again. And then you have some of the sort of more finite details within that, right? So if we're talking about bills of lading in Section 7, which I'm sure you've all heard or are familiar with, the use of MAP 21 to go after someone who has illegally brokered, it does give you a private right of action. And the interesting thing about MAP 21 is you can actually go after principals and directors personally, using fraud claims as a tool. So there's a variety of things you can do. Hopefully that's not too much. Depending on the situation at hand, you can use sort of different tools, collection standpoint, either if you're the carrier or if you're the shipper consignee who is trying to avoid paying twice.
Let's say this one. Let's say we have a broker that goes out of business and doesn't pay, a large sum to the carrier base. You find out about it too late, because this is a common one that we see, especially when compression happens in our industry. You've got rate compression capacity compression. So it's a very difficult time normally in the economy when we see this. Things are slowing down. There's less volume moving. Everybody's looking for revenue. The shippers are looking for the lowest revenue that they can, that they need to pay to get the shipment moved and delivered on time. And then the carriers are looking for the most revenue they can generate to stay afloat, right? So this is a very volatile time, I would say, in the market. And this is where we are starting to see a large number of people going out of business. And as we hit the subject, every one of these situations may appear the same, or many of them may appear the same, but when you start to peel back the onion, they're all different in some ways. So everyone, it's almost like no two are alike, right? Historically, Pat, how have you handled these historically? What do you think is the right way?
If we have not paid, let's say the broker, then typically what we will try to do is work with the carriers that are looking for the payment. And typically what we do is we will offer payment at the contracted rate that we had in place with the broker. And then there's times too where we've come across where the carrier hadn't been paid and, we had already paid. And so typically we would look at different ways to negotiate, saying, okay, can we do business together and try to help you offset, what you've lost? So end up doing direct business with the carrier.
Okay. Has that been successful for you in the past?
It's worked out good, and then it's worked out not so good. So depending on, what lanes they're running, what works for them, and what we have to offer.
So you basically then try to find a way to make everybody amicably whole.
Oh, yeah.
And minimize
Correct.
Everyone's loss.
Yes.
And stay out of court with Thomas.
Yeah.
That's a smart approach,
So,
right?
Thomas, is there a limitation? Is there a statute of limitation when one happens? And let's say it's a couple of years. Is there a limitation?
Yeah, so there's an 18-month statute of limitations on freight charge collection generally from the accrual of the claim, which is delivery. So that can be extended in certain circumstances. But yeah, it's 18 months generally. Unfortunately, if you're a carrier and you're still trying to collect like 3 years later, you're probably out of luck. Sometimes I'm on both sides of this. So you can find ways to sort of push that statute of limitations out. If you're on the other side of it, you're not going to get less than 18 months, but you can try to prevent that extension as well. So, but generally it's 18 months.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.